Bienvenidos to
Merendiando!
Our guest today is Armando Minjarez.
Armando Minjarez is a Mexican interdisciplinary artist, designer, and community organizer. His artistic practice is guided by themes of displacement, collaboration, and empowerment to open spaces for the development of social change strategy and creative expression.
He has been the co-founder and creator of many community-focused arts initiatives, bridging social justice, community organizing, and the arts in Kansas, USA, such as the Seed House, La Casa de la Semilla, the ICT Army of Artists, the North End Urban Arts Festival, and the Horizontes Project. He also runs a ceramic design studio called Del Norte Studio, which sells beautiful ceramic for everyday use, and it ships to Canada.
In this interview, we chatted about community organizing in Kansas's rural communities, how he produced the largest mural ever made, and kioscos and designing public space. Heads up, dear listeners, or snacks if you like that name for yourselves, because I think you're all snacks. Next week is a break for the podcast, so expect your next episode of Radio Aluna Teatro goodness to come at you on November 4th. That's 2 Wednesdays from now. With that said, let's dive into the episode.
I am currently located in Wichita, Kansas, USA. So right smack in the middle of the country. If you take a US map and you fold it in fourths and then you open it up, that center point where the fold is like a few miles north of Wichita.
How is it to be at the center of that situation right now?
In some instances, I feel fortunate to not be in a super densely populated city, right? Like some of the coastal cities, or like even like, you too, you're in Toronto. There's also the flip side of that we are in a more rural, which tends to be a little more conservative, aka COVID is a hoax type of situation. So, there's no easy answer.
So you were born in Chihuahua, right?
Correct, Parral, Chihuahua, yes.
But then you moved to Kansas. How did Kansas look in your mind before you moved there?
Oh, goodness. Well, I mean, even the Wizard of Oz was my only reference point to Kansas. And I didn't even know where Kansas was or what it meant. So I didn't really know much about it, right? As my oldest brother moved to Kansas in like 97 or 98, I'm not sure. So that's when I actually kind of started to hear more about it. But even then, it was sort of this faraway land where there's tornadoes. and that's it, right? Like nothing about it was real in any way other than there's tornadoes and it's far away.
So that now that you've lived there for a lot of your life, how has that image shifted for you?
It's really quite an interesting state. Most people think of it as this kind of, a small town USA, which is true. But it's much more than that, for sure.
Interesting. It's much more than that. Okay, well, what is it?
Yeah. So through the work that I've done, the research that I've done as an artist in different art projects, I've learned a lot of the history in this place. And there's a history of resistance, which I'm interested in, being a community organizer and an activist too. I really appreciate that history of resistance that you find here. Like Carrie Nation, she's known for really pushing for prohibition laws, for alcohol. I love drinking, but, I appreciate the spirit. She will literally go with the hatchet and like break bottles and bars and,
Like now? These days?
This is prohibition time, right? So like 100
right.
years ago, right? But like there's a history of that. There's also John Brown with abolition, big abolitionists and being this really radical figure in the abolitionist movement. There are stories of indigenous communities who, resisted, the Western movement of colonizers and European colonizers in the area. And it's really fascinating. And even part of Kansas, that corner of the southwest part of the state where I lived in Ulysses is when I first moved. I lived in Garden City. Dodge City is part of that conglomeration. Dodge City, it's famous for kind of being this old West town with, you know, Billy the Kid and all these like figures. All of that was part of, at one point, it was part of Mexican territory, Mexican nation. So literally, a section of Kansas was Mexican territory. And then when you look at the demographic breakup of that population right now, you have those towns, majority are Mexican descent people and people of color. We're talking like 60%, 65% of the population in those towns are brown people and people, you know, mostly from Mexican descent. And to me, that's fascinating, right? It's almost like we managed to populate some geographic boundary that at one point was Mexico. And of course, even that, you know, was that territory was indigenous territory before it was designated, you know, as part of the new Spain or whatever. It's just fascinating to learn that history, that there's a connection to these places that go beyond sort of my own story of migration or movement, right, as a person in this land.
Because you're in a rural environment, how do you find that those rural histories impact the rest of your country? Because it's so easy to be so isolated. How can rural communities impact urban communities?
Yeah, so that is a really interesting question. If I look at Wichita as an example, right, for that question, you know, this is a city that there's a lot of people here who come from those rural communities. For a lot of those people, this is their big move, right? This is their I'm going to the city move. I think I've been able to be exposed to those smaller communities that I maybe understand them in a different way. And it even applies to my own immigrant community. I mean, Parral, where I grew up, I really grew up with the mentality of being a small town guy. But then I moved from Parral to Ulysses, Kansas, population 6,000. And suddenly it's like, oh my God, this whole town is the size of my neighborhood, right? You know, and Parral is a small colonial city, really densely populated, right? We're kind of on top of each other. So you still get a lot of like sort of the very urban sense to it, even though it's a small city. Whereas in Ulysses, it's like everything is so spread out. You have to drive, right? Like everything is designed for vehicles. So anyway, like, and looking at the immigrant community in Ulysses, a lot of them come from the rural parts of Chihuahua. Chihuahua is also a very rural state, like Kansas, right? Where there's a lot of cattle industry and farming. Those are big industries there. So it's not dissimilar from Kansas. And then people move here because of the jobs, but then they realize that, oh, there's all, like, I can buy a farm, I can buy some acreage and have pigs and chickens and horses. So suddenly they realize that they can have a very similar lifestyle than they did back in Chihuahua or in Durango, which is where a lot of the people living here come from. So it's something familiar, even though the language, it's different. The culture, for the most part, is different. You find similarities in the way that you can carry on with your life, right? This kind of rural farm lifestyle. And with that, it comes like this really, people really appreciate physical work, hard work that is physical, right? And so then I've been able to see kind of these bridges connected between very conservative and sometimes even racist white people that live in rural areas build friendships with like Mexican immigrants, and their point of connection, that bridge that connects them, it's their appreciation of like labor and hard work, right? The hard work that comes with running a farm or living in a farm. And to me, that's fascinating. Like, you can have these very different life experiences and very different ideologies, yet you find common ground, and often it's connected to like the land, right? And like how laborious it is to live from the land. And there's that. I don't know what to make of it. Like it complicates my own understanding of my own world, right? It's easy to dismiss someone because of their beliefs or their politics. But then when you go out there and you're like, okay, like I know that you're racist because I've seen you and I've known you for years. but
Mhm.
also like you have all these friends who are Mexican immigrants, and you say, right, you're like, oh, they're okay because he's one of the good Mexicans, right? Yeah, that's super racist, but also I
God.
understand that you mean it in the sense that you found a way to connect and find value in your humanity, right? And it's so odd, and if anything, like I said, it complicates my own understanding of these communities, and it makes it difficult to dismiss somebody just based on their politics and ideologies, right? It forces me to continue to look for that humanity that I so desperately want people to see within me.
Talking about Ulysses, that's how you say it,
Yep,
right?
Ulysses.
Ulysses. And there's this little documentary, and I love that they were doing the celebration of La Virgen, el cumpleaños
Right.
de la Virgen, that was like 12th of December. And I was looking at it, and I kept thinking, like, I love how as immigrants sometimes we move from one place to another, but we end up recreating what we had at home, which it's great for some people. But as a person who was like, I identify as queer, reaching out to, let's say, my immigrant Mexican community
Yeah.
here, I was so terrified because I was like, I identify with everything you're showing me because I grew up with every tradition that we all grew up. But the part of me that is like queer, I don't feel safe in this community. As a community organizer, I have that question for you. Is like, how would you, when you work with these communities, how do you approach the flaws? Like, how do we keep getting tradition, yeah, passing tradition on, but shifting it that it's a little bit more inclusive and loving?
No, that's a great question. I mean, and it's all part of the work. I think that, I mean, I have the same fears, right? And when I started doing community organizing, I was living in Western Kansas, and I was younger, and I wasn't out to everyone, right? So there was still, I got really good at not disclosing information that didn't
Mm-hmm.
have to be disclosed, right? I didn't want to lie
Mm-hmm.
or present myself as someone else, but that just meant that I just didn't have to disclose everything about me. And I still feel that that's true. I mean, I always think about, if you are a cisgender straight person, no one, you don't ever have to disclose that. You don't have
Yeah.
to say, oh, by the way, I'm straight and I'm cisgender. Like, nobody ever
Uh-huh.
fucking does that, right? So my own part was like, why do I have to do that, right? Like, it's almost like we have to start challenging the idea of coming out, right? Like of a closet. Like, if you don't have to do it, why do I have to do it? So that was my mentality back then, with a good dose of fear, right? And homophobia as well. It wasn't just resistance. It was like, well, also I'm kind of scared. But to answer your question, first of all, they were segregated. There was the Spanish mass and the English mass.
Mm-hmm.
The Spanish mass, as you can imagine, was super animated with a live band, with like
Oh, full production. Yeah.
norteño, kind of up music, with the bass and the drums and all of that. And then the the English mass was super kind of, more traditional, mellow. And so you already had this tension build up. And then you have people in the congregations who are wanting to introduce celebrations of Day of the Death, Dia de los Muertos, and setting up altars and bringing in candles and flowers and like, and
Skulls, just skulls at all.
right, the image of a skull, right? And then La Virgen de Guadalupe, again, it's like you have these people dancing with these costumes, and like it looks like it's some sort of witchcraft thing going on, and maybe it is. And all those things, were created a lot of friction, right? But what it did is it helped people develop a sense of power, right? And to also to question why this was important. Why? Because we are marginalized, because this is part of my culture, my tradition, and I want to impart it to my children. And those are the reasons why we need to fight for this, right? And in that process, you start identifying with the marginalized, right? And what it does, it creates an opening to have a conversation about who are those marginalized in our community, right? It's me as an immigrant, but it's also me as a queer person, right? It's also me as an undocumented immigrant in the US. right? It's women within a patriarchal machista community, you know, and like the nuns are, and the amazing thing is that you have, you know, this institution like the Catholic Church, which has priests, men, right, at the very top, and then women, nuns who are to be subservient to the men. You know, a woman can never be pope, right? So the very structure of the institution is, it's so problematic. But yeah, so to going back to your question again, is going back to really investigating that, you know, the idea of the oppressed, and that creates openings, right, to have conversations about all the different oppressed identities and communities within, you know, any given group of people, and to bring your full self, right, so that you talk about your experience, right? We're not talking about ideologies, we're not talking about policy, we're not talking about politics, we're talking about your experience as a human, your full self, right? And bringing that to the table, right, as a way to connect with one another. So that's, as an organizer, those are the opportunities that I looked for, right? And it didn't stop just at my identity as a queer person, but it really created opportunities to talk about racism, to talk about colorism, to talk about like the caste system in Mexico, and how that has really shaped our own understanding of class and race, right, within Mexico, which is so much different than the US in a lot of ways. So all of those are ways to, right, so those are different, you know, topics, I guess, that you're able to then bring into the conversation when that opening happens.
I feel like you are clearly such a like well-articulated community organizer and have thought about these things really carefully. Like, I can see through your practice that meaningful social change and art together can be really powerful and something that you're interested in. So for you, how is art and social change related? And what components do you need for a meaningful, impactful presentation of some kind of art piece?
So I fully believe that the art doesn't have to be connected to social change or social justice. I think that as artists, you know, we should be afforded the freedom to just create whatever that means. And it's something that I more so now than before bring up because as people of color in the US, and, you know, again, someone from different marginalized communities, you know, that there's always like this expectation that that my artwork has to be connected to some sort of social change movement, right? We're not afforded the opportunity to simply create like so many white artists, white man artists have been able to do throughout history, right? That they can create just to create, and we have to have a reason why we're creating. But having said that, like most recently, well, really it was 2015 that has been developing slowly. I created the Norte studio, a ceramic studio, as a way for me to just create, right? Before I went into this whole other part of my life around social change and social justice, I was hyper focused on becoming an architect. I really wanted to become an architect. That was a big part of why I ended up doing all of this, right? Because I was undocumented, couldn't go to college, had to drop out. It was really devastating. Experienced fraud, you know, in the process. It was bad. And that's why I got involved in community organizing, because I experienced so intimately the ramifications of an oppressive racist system, and I wanted to change that. However, that part in me, is always wanting to create, to design, right? Like to look at our built environment. Our built environment has been designed, right, all around us. And I've always been intrigued by our built environment, from like the lid in my water bottle, right, to the packaging of like, you know, these crackers right on my desk. Everything around us has been designed. And someone had to sit there and think and go through a design thinking process, right, to find the best solution. And that never left me. I mean, with wanting to be an architect and engage in design thinking, and never left me. So I started this business, Del Norte, as a way for me to carve some space to continue to just make things that are that satisfy the side of me, the designer part of me, right? So I'm making these spots, these functional objects. I sell them online on fairs, on different stores, and it's really satisfying, and in a way something that really helps me keep a level of sanity, and like it really helps my mental health, because this other side of my practice is so much involved in very heavy topics, right? And all the work that I've done has, if there's a connecting thread, is my own story with displacement and movement of people within a geography, and sort of what that means, right? So those are the themes throughout it.
I think that's such a great point. Like, we should just be able to express whatever. And yes, we have a lot of work to do in terms of justice because we can see it, but also we have these like beautiful ideas that, like, why not just like express them? So the previous podcast guest, she was a playwright based in Mexico City. Her name's Paula Zelaya Cervantes. She's awesome. And every episode we get the guest to ask the next guest a question. So Paula has a question for you. When did you first know you wanted to make art professionally? Or like, when was the first inkling or spark that inspired you to make art a big part of your life?
I should say that I was raised by an artist. My mom is an artist, although she would never call herself that.
Oh, what does she do?
She does everything. I mean, she's single mom, single parent household, and she was always hustling. I mean, she had her jobs, but also like all the other things that she would do. Mm-hmm. She would say that she's a crafter, right? But the reason why I think she's an artist is because of the way she thinks, right? Her ability to just like problem solve is incredible. And so I grew up, right, with she had this table full of materials all the time.
What did she make?
She was always hustling things, right, to make a living, right, to bring, home some points. So could be like, it kind of changed by season. So she was Christmas, she would make all these like beautiful, intricate Christmas decorations. She was like embroidering and sewing and painting. So I grew up with that. So I guess in a way, kind of, I've always seen art and creativity as a way to like hustle and make some coin, make a living. It never felt like something that was, I don't know, like unattainable. But to be more specific, it was in high school. My art teacher in high school taught me how to paint large. She built and designed some beautiful sets for the school plays. Not your average like school play designs. Yeah. So she really saw, I'm still learning English and whatnot, but she saw my ability, right? That I could really sketch well, draw. I had a talent for the arts. So she took me under her wing and started teaching me how to paint backdrops, and these are very large things. So it was my senior year in high school. There was a mural in town in this racquetball that she had painted about 20 years before that. And it was really like faded and chipping off. And she was like, hey, the county commission wants to repaint this. And they're asking me to repaint it since I painted the original one. But do you want to do it? If you want to do it, I will give them your name. And I was like, sure. Yes, whatever. It pays? Okay.
Yeah.
So she like, gave me that gig. And so then, I was contracted by the county commissioners, right? This is like a government entity, right?
Yeah.
And, I put a bid for it. They offered me half the money that I asked for. But then I ended up painting. I have no idea what I was doing. I tell you that. I had no clue what I was doing, but I did it, right? I painted it, and it turned out much better than I ever imagined. I'm still pretty proud of that job.
Yeah.
And they ended up paying me what I asked for originally. They liked it so much. Like, wow, you're actually legit. We're going to pay you the full amount that you asked for. So that really was a big lesson on trusting my own instincts and really like taking a big risk. Like I was sure in my abilities, but I had never done something like that. So
Yeah.
it's like you have to take the risk and do it.
Yeah. Well, murals have taken a huge part of your, I think, life since
Right.
that moment. Like one of the big projects I think that we noticed was the Horizontes project.
Yes.
And we're wondering if you can talk a little bit about that.
Well, Horizontes, I guess, is a large-scale community engaged art project, right? That is based and it's hyper local. So it's based in Wichita, and it engages these two historic neighborhoods in the north part of town. One known as the North End, and another one as Northeast Wichita. And these are adjacent to downtown. And the North End has historically been populated by mostly brown people, mostly Mexican immigrants, and more recently Southeast Asian immigrants as well. And then Northeast has been the historic Black neighborhood in the city. And there were so many similarities in those two neighborhoods, in the challenges that they faced over the years, the needs that the community have right currently, the challenges that you find in those neighborhoods around a gradual divestment from the city, for businesses, a lot of empty retail space, schools who are underfunded, overpopulated, a lack of programming for youth and adult services, on and on and on and on. Kind of your quintessential US POC populated neighborhoods, right? That don't have a lot of investment from the town. So I really wanted to find a way to talk about how to bring investment into the neighborhoods, but also actively prevent the displacement of people that comes through gentrification, right? And with that, I really wanted to challenge ourselves as artists in our role in being complicit with the displacement of people through gentrification that we have seen all throughout different communities and, in the US or even in Canada, something that I saw in Toronto while I was there.
Oh, we specialize. We have our own special brand for sure.
Yes. So, again, because of it's like, this is not new. Like at this point, it's like we already knew that artists are used as a tool by developers and often city governments to sort of quote unquote clean up an area, bring up property value, make it attractive to developers, and then displace people that live there as gentrification expands. So I wanted to have the conversation from the beginning, but not stop there, but actually start looking at models, right? That really look at how to prevent the gentrification. So that meant that we develop a very robust engagement process that included a survey, but we sent people going door to door, canvassers, talking to neighbors about what are the things that you want and the things that you need in your community. And it's quality of life things that talk about workforce development, business, entrepreneurship, support, outdoor spaces, parks, public art, housing, and education, right? Mm-hmm. And we had a couple community psychologists that really helped us develop that survey so that it was effective in getting the data that we wanted. We had so many interviews with people one-on-one, and all those conversations really also helped shape the focus of the survey. We did research on different oral history projects that have been done in both neighborhoods as well. So we relied a lot on digging up the history that was already there. We hired photographers mm-hmm. from the neighborhoods to photograph some of the people that were interviewed as well, because we wanted to humanize people, right? This is not just data. I wanted data because I know data, it's what city governments will listen to. But I also didn't want to stop there. It's like this data came from people. So I wanted to humanize that data by actually putting people forward, right? And with that, it was important that we also address head on Black and Brown solidarity and what that actually means. And for us, it meant that we were gonna do educational workshops that talked about the root causes of migration. Why are we here to begin with? To talk about colorism and within communities of color, right? So why is there so many prejudices that we find within our own communities? We talked about, racism in the US and understanding that context. We talked about redlining and practices of divestment, right? Specific to these neighborhoods. Again, because we assume that the people who are subjected to these inequities understand their own history, but often that's not the case. So many times we don't even understand why we're in the situation that we're in. So it was like looking inward. And to be quite frank, a big part of the motivation behind the entire project was my own, just like being tired of being in front of groups of white people all the time, educating them about all of these topics, right? I spent so many years now here in Wichita doing workshops and trainings around racism and around inequity and how to create more equitable spaces. And I was just so tired of doing that and not actually doing that work with my own community. And in addition to that, I'm the only kind of your token brown person at the table, right? Always asking, where are the other artists? Where are the artists of color? How come you're not inviting queer artists? Where are women? And it's like, oh, we don't know where to find them, but we found you, right? So we hired close to 40 artists for this project that came from those two neighborhoods, right? Out of those 40 artists, only one was white. And it was intentional. It was like, let me show you where the artists are. You're not looking, right? We also wanted the art that we created as part of this challenge to the displacement of gentrification. We wanted the art to look like the people in those communities and those neighborhoods, right? So the artists that we hired grew up, currently live in those neighborhoods, right? So they have a connection to it. And it was really a powerful experience, right? The biggest one that we painted was a grain elevator. Camila, you alluded to that. And it's a grain silo or grain elevator. I don't know if people in Canada are familiar with them.
Well, we might have a picture if people want to go to the show notes.
Yeah, for sure.
Yeah.
So basically, it's like this long, tall structures that follow the train tracks all across the city. And the train tracks they go in between these two neighborhoods. Like literally, you go across the train tracks and you're in the Black neighborhood, right? And vice versa. Also, right along the tracks is the highway, I-135. And the interstate highway system in the U.S. was also, it's infamous for the history of displacement as well. When they started being built, you can go to almost any city in the U.S. that has an interstate highway, and it goes right through the historic Black neighborhoods, right? And they use eminent domain as a tactic to displace, to tear down houses, to destroy communities. And that shows you the value, right? Or the lack of value that these communities had for governments, right? 50 years ago when the highway was being built. So it's not unique to Wichita, right? Like it's happened all across the country, right? In Northeast here, that neighborhood, there, because of segregation, they had their own sort of main street, Cleveland Street, with the theater, with doctor's offices, lawyers, grocery store, you name it. And then this highway was built just like a block east of it. So it totally cut off access to that area, and it also decimated so much housing. That, in addition to desegregation, it totally killed that economy and the whole strip of commerce, right? So now there's been efforts to renovate that theater. It was saved from being demolished, and there's different community groups raising money to renovate it as the only African-American theater in town. So we wanted to partner with them and bring attention and resources through the project, right? Also in the North End, there's the Nomar Theater District. Very similar history, segregated theater. It became, with like the Mexicans and the balcony type of signs. It became the first desegregated theater. Now it's set in unoccupied, but there's some efforts to renovate and redevelop the area. So that's where we concentrate our work. So there's these two very similar neighborhoods with very similar histories and very similar opportunities kind of right now. And we wanted to use art and the project as a way to bring more attention and resources and to energize people and to continue to create to interconnectedness, right? To intentionally introduce and build relationship among those communities. And I can tell you that since then, we have seen so many of the artists that have participated with us have been able to organize their own events, their own festivals, their own exhibitions. They're joining boards, they're joining other art groups. There's investment, that has been leveraged to bring into those theaters and there's community. So some of these things have been working, right? You never know how things are going to turn out, but we knew that if we were very intentional in building the relationships and to rebuilding the social fabric again, that those things were going to come, and they're happening. So it's really exciting to see that. And then to kind of top it all off, I call it a shiny object, is a big mural. And that one, it's the largest of its kind in the world,
Wow.
as far as we know. And it was painted by Gleo. Gleo, it's a Colombian artist, and she came down to paint it. And it is a truly awesome piece of artwork. And I don't mean to use awesome, like I mean awesome in the sense of the world. It is, once you see it in person, like it is really hard to understand the magnitude of this mural. And the fact that she painted it, and the image itself, it's an image composed. In the center, you have this woman in her skirt. We call her Wichita, Miss Wichita. And her skirt is actually based on an image of a Wachita lodge. So here in this part of here in the city, along the Arkansas River, the Wachita tribe would, they're nomadic, and they would hang out here during the warmer months and build these beautiful, huge grass lodges, right, as their dwelling. The mural itself, it's grounded by the indigenous community. There's these people literally building this lodge at the center of the mural. And then Wichita, this woman is holding hands with another one. And that's based on a photograph from these two girls, Doña Vicky and her friend, her cousin, who it was taken literally down the street from the grain elevator on the soda shop back in the 50s. And then right under, on their sides, there's these laborers. They were from a photograph of these railroad laborers that were literally laying down the tracks that are right there in front of the grain elevator, right? Like we cross those tracks every day, several times a day. And that's how we got Mexican immigrants, because they came down to build these tracks, right? This artery in the country, really. Right next to them, there's these guys wearing these coats who worked at a meat packing plant that was just across the street. Another big part of the industry and the economy and like how the city was built. And then these bigger faces on the sides, kind of disjointed, are people who currently live in the neighborhood. Patricia, who is the mom of Quintus, who was our right-hand warrior, who was, Gleo's, one of Gleo's main assistants in painting the mural. He's an underground graffiti legend in the city, and he got to work on this project. And Miss Pat, which she became the mother, right, for the whole crew. So Leo decided to incorporate her image in the mural, right? Chris, who is in his 20s, and he's also a creative and a father, and it's starting a family here. He is on the mural. Angela Martinez, who's like this amazing force, right, in the Latinx community in town, just like with a community center. Her and her husband work with youth, right? Her stepson has a whole organization working with youth and and that are going into gangs. So all of these people depicted in the mural are the community. However, these are the people who have constantly been erased from history. So I wanted to depict our communities in the most magnificent way, so that we could never be erased anymore, so that you cannot drive down the highway, because you can see it from two different highways. You can kind of see it from downtown. You cannot drive past these and ignore the fact that we have been here from the beginning and we will continue to be here. And with reflection on it, it's led me to even question my own identity as an immigrant. Like, am I actually an immigrant or am I just a visitor? I understand that I did not grow up in these lands, but my own history goes back to the land. So I'm not an immigrant. I'm a visitor. I'm visiting, right, these communities. But I didn't immigrate. Like, my history literally goes back to this land, my own family history. So it's even changed my own understanding of myself, right? As I reflect on the project, it's like we were always here. And now there's this ginormous piece of art. You can't ignore us. Like, there's this black and brown faces all over it. Producing that mural was such a beast. That was the hardest thing I have ever done in my life so far.
Let's talk about what you're doing currently, because we read about it, and Camila was really excited about the exhibition.
Paper pavilions, yes.
And we read a little bit about your piece called Tecnotitlan.
Seriously, I just like read the title and I was like, what? Tecnotitlan. I was like, what?
And it's about kioscos, right?
Yeah, so this is a exhibition. Sean Starowitz is who curated that exhibition and invited me into it. The invitation was pre-pandemic, right? Like, the project started as a way to think about the pavilion, the quintessential pavilion, and how to provide different ideas, right? To even question that idea of the pavilion and what we could present for it, right? Imagining a different thing.
Right, because it's a public space, is what I'm gathering.
Right. It's a public space, right? And when you think about art fairs, right, it's usually like the Mexico pavilion, the Canadian pavilion, and then you get to see kind of a selection of artists from those countries and whatnot. So it's really thinking about that idea and imagining something different. For me, really, the first thing that came to mind was el kiosco, right, or kiosk. Growing up in Mexico, Monica, you know this, el kiosco, it's like,
yes.
It's a centerpiece of public life. In la plaza principal is where you find the kiosco, and that's like our stage, right, for public life. Kioscos are used for music, for theater, for dissent and protests, government campaigns to like vaccinate people.
So for people who are listening to this and can't really imagine what a typical kiosco might be like, what would you say? How would you describe it?
It's like is this structure that it's usually hexagon or octagon in shape. And it's elevated typically from the ground. So it literally kind of like a stage, a center stage that you walk around all the way 360, and it has a roof. And usually, historically, they're very ornate and elaborate. They come from this kind of northern African Moorish style of architecture, highly decorated. That's how it eventually makes its way into Spain, right, and then to Mexico. So they're usually kind of wrought iron style, but
painted.
Right, and painted. But there's so many different that's not the only way that they look. There's so many different variations that you see nowadays, more minimalist, modern approaches to it. Some are super kind of low budget DIY. Some are very fancy and like almost like royal, very royal looking. Literally the center stage, right? The definition of that. So when I thought of a pavilion, that's of course immediately where my mind went. But in thinking of the pandemic, it's like, here's this quintessential piece of public life in Mexico, and I couldn't help but think about the absence of that right now, right? And I built this like almost like mystical technicolor landscape, quasi-urban futuristic landscape of what a public space could be, what I wanted it to be. And I wanted to get lost in it, right? I wanted my mind to go in there and imagine it. And my hope was that as people saw it, that they can picture themselves as well, just like walking in there, playing around, climbing, going up and down, and really exploring this magical space. again, escape. I wanted to escape, right, into
Yeah.
something that was happy and magical.
Titlando, like what? How do those worlds mix together? Like, why did you choose that?
Well, it is, in my understanding, the idea of a public space is like the kiosco. It's such a it's something that came from Europe, right, through colonization. Or I mean, it came from Northern Africa into Spain to colonization, and then into the Americas. But our understanding of public space is also shaped by our own indigenous traditions in Mexico, right? And you have places like Tenochtitlan, and kind of this vast plazas and avenues and spaces for worship and governance and just like education, all of these things, right, that are part of these indigenous pre-Columbian cities in the Americas. And that is very much a part of public life. Go to un mercado, like,
Yeah.
to me, that's one of the places that has remained, like, there's so much essence of our indigenous public life is still baked within a mercado. So, when I was thinking about a title, I was like, well, this is definitely like super techno, right? Like I can have a rave in there anytime. Or also just like this technicolor landscape, right?
Mm-hmm.
And then in reflecting on how indigenous life has shaped, it's still in our built environment. It's like, oh, Tecnotitlan, that's it. That's it.
Yeah, it's such like a playful way to go about it. And I think, yeah, the playfulness is so needed. We need like
Right.
some hope.
And that's what I wanted. I just wanted some landscape that we could all skate to. And it's
I'd
fun,
move there.
I
Like-
couldn't present the actual object, so instead it's a photograph. That's also kind of a departure of some of my work. Usually, they're installations. The work that I present in a gallery typically are installations and sculpture. So we couldn't do that at this time. So, I enlisted my good friend Hugo Celada Romero, who's a Guatemalan-born artist who lives here in Wichita. He's my dear friend. So he helped me figure out the photography side of it, and that's what is being, shown as a photograph. So yet again, I'm taking another departure in my own practice, but
crafting.
wouldn't have it any other way.
Yeah, that's so beautiful.
What is a merienda, a snack that you've been enjoying lately? And it doesn't have to be food. It can be a song, a book, an article, whatever you want to share with our audience.
Well, I've been indulging, and I mean indulging, on desserts this whole pandemic.
Yes.
I've been getting really good at like making cakes too, with like fancy fillings and like layers, and I have a huge sweet tooth. Like that's my Achilles heel. It's like we've just been making so many desserts, and it's comforting. It's like whenever the world is literally burning,
Oh my God, straight up.
and like I'm so exhausted emotionally and mentally about the state of this fucking country.
Yep.
It's like I'm gonna eat a delicious slice of key lime pie, or like this chocolate cake with a chocolate ganache filling and a blackberry compote. It was so.
Did you make that?
Yes.
I think it speaks so much about your practice that you've been saying. It's like, I like working with my hands. I like just getting into new things. I just doing
And the
stuff. And I'm
design.
like,
Totally. I mean, I have this like bending wheel, like a little turntable for my ceramics, and like that thing is in the kitchen, and that's what I
Don't
use
tell me that.
ice the cakes. Because
I have a follow-up. Do you like create your own recipes? Do you have a recipe book or like online, a website that you really like?
No, so it's kind of a little bit of both. My partner and I have been looking at the Preppy Kitchen. Yeah, he has we started funding his YouTube videos, and he's got a blog, and so it's a little bit of both. Like there's technical things like that. I just want to know what the recipe takes. But once I know the basic recipe, then it's like all bets are off. Oh, like I said, my mom is an amazing baker. So like she's taught me so many things. Like she would make these gorgeous cakes for our birthdays, so I've learned a lot from her.
Shout out to Armando's mom.
Yeah,
I know.
Vicky.
And
Yeah, and to wrap up the interview, we'll ask you if you can ask a question to a fellow artist in the Americas right now, what would you ask?
I was thinking about this and I'm like, what am I gonna ask? I don't know. For some reason, Celia Cruz is like the first thing that came to my mind. And what I want to ask is, what role did Celia Cruz play in your life? Then, it might be presumptuous of me that, that they, assuming that they know who Celia Cruz is, but there was so much about Celia Cruz that was so intriguing and captivating to me growing up and as an adult, right? The older I got, the more I learned about her as a human. And of course, I love her so much. But, as a small queer boy, it's like those shoes, like,
oh
what?
no.
Those
Yeah, no,
wigs.
the whole look.
It's like, if anything, she showed me what could be possible. If she can do that, then I can do it too, right? And that's huge. As a kid, to see that, it's like, wow, she's getting away with this. Like, this is amazing. So yeah, it's like, what role did Celia Cruz had in your life, right?
I'm very excited to ask this to the next guest.
Me too.
Yeah.
Also, what a great way to finish the podcast.
Thank you so much for being Merendiando con nosotros,
Yes.
Armando. It was such a delight. Del Norte Studios, your ceramic studio, is online and we should all go check it out. Do you ship to Canada?
I ship worldwide.
Wow.
Perfect.
What music to our ears.
Yes.
Okay.
Thank you so much. This was so much fun.
We are speaking to you from the shores of this beautiful Zaga Igan, known to some as Lake Ontario, in Toronto, or Tuggeranto. This is the ancestral territory of the Haudenosaunee, or Longhouse Confederacy, the Anishinaabe Nation, the Wendat, and the Mississaugas of the Credit. This land is covered by the Dish with One Spoon Wampum and Treaty 13, also known as the Toronto Purchase.
Araluna, we remember that people can begin to heal when they are hurt. We are committed to artful participation in disagreements. We are committed to unsettling ourselves towards connection, respect, and justice for all people who now live in this city, which has been a meeting place since time immemorial.
Radio Aluna Theatre is produced by Aluna Theatre, with support from the Toronto Arts Council, the Ontario Arts Council, the Canada Council for the Arts, the Department of Canadian Heritage, and the Metcalfe Foundation.
Aluna Theatre is Beatriz Pisano and Trevor Shelness, with Sue Ballant. Radio Aluna Theatre is produced by Mónica Garrido and Camila Díaz Varela. For more about Aluna Theatre, visit us at alunatheatre.ca, follow at Aluna Theatre on Twitter or Instagram, or like us on Facebook.
Miigwech and Nyawangoa.